I am NCR Davis, and I am the author of For the Boys, the war story of a combat nurse in Patton's Third Army. And if you've followed me for a while on social media, you'll know that I typically refrain from anything political, any commentary politically speaking. But I just was so struck by a conversation that Tucker Carlson had recently with a man he identified as a great historian named Mr. Darrell Cooper. And I don't know, maybe you've heard of the guy, but I had not. And maybe you'd heard some of his assertions about World War II. I had not. And I was stunned by the inaccuracies. Um, Absolutely no evidence to back up his claims, particularly about Sir Winston Churchill wanting the war to continue, and Hitler did not want the war to continue. It was just asinine. I have to say, it's just completely asinine. And the world's great historians have deservedly done some pushback against that podcast. And while I'm a free speech advocate, of course, Mr. Darrell Cooper, apparently he has a podcast of his own. Certainly he's free in this country to assert whatever he wishes to assert. And he can conjure up any imaginative things that he wants to about World War II or anything. But you know, there's a fine line in terms of whether or not a journalist should give someone like that who asserts things that have no evidence behind them a wide audience like Tucker Carlson enjoys. That's what really irked me about it. It maybe some of it was because personally, my publisher, Casemate, a small publisher, and but so committed. I mean, they vetted me for a couple of years because I was an unknown, and I'm not an academic historian, and typically their authors are at Casemate Publishers, so they really had to vet me. They had to know that my archives, that I just didn't make up all this stuff about my mother's service in World War II as a combat nurse. They vetted me. They made sure that my mother really served in the 39th Evac hospital, that, you know, everything in that book was, they made sure that, if my mother said that General Patton was there on a certain day to visit the 39th, they could easily look back and see if indeed General Patton was visiting the 39th Evac that day in Normandy or wherever. So it's the kind of robust, I worked on that book for 12 years. A lot of that time was spent researching where my mother was, and tracing her movements across Normandy and Belgium, Luxembourg, and then into Germany. And, it took me a long time to research and make sure that my evidence and all of her archives could be backed up by evidence. And, hardly anyone even, knows about this story that I wrote. And that's fine. I'm getting the word out as best I can. But the fact of the matter of God, Mr. Darrell Cooper, who just makes up this stuff, and gets an audience the size that Tucker Carlson enjoys, and is somehow validated. Maybe it's because he said such extreme things, and maybe Tucker Carlson knows nothing about World War II history. It sounded good to him. I don't know Tucker's motives for having someone like Mr. Cooper on his show. Um, that's, I don't know what the motives were. But, there's just a fine line between free speech, which Mr. Darrell Cooper is free to do, versus allowing him an audience that he does not deserve. And also one in which is so wide, a lot of the people who listen to Tucker Carlson, I mean, they're from all walks of life. They don't know history. They may not know some of those people. They may not know about World War II history in such depth. And to hear it from someone like that who is really, I have to say, it was on the edge of Nazi propaganda. And that is what really, really, really is troublesome about that entire episode. I mean, Nazis don't need help. They didn't need any help in the last century, and they certainly don't need any help in this century. And for someone to be promoting the kind of rhetoric that Mr. Darrell Cooper uh, touts, it was really scary and disgusting. And I'm telling you from an emotional standpoint that it was very hard for me to hear. And also, just, I'm not an academic historian, but I've had to study World War II history a lot in order to get a book traditionally published by a very reputable military history publishing company who vetted me and made sure that the work was accurate. And then, I could have just made up a bunch of stuff and published it myself, and probably would maybe had, maybe I would have been making some money on the project by now. But, validity and veracity are very important when you're writing a nonfiction book. And if we don't have authentic history in this country, uh, we are lost. We are absolutely lost. We have to have people who tell authentic history, and they are the ones who deserve a wide audience. And anyone is allowed to say whatever they wish, and that's fine. But don't give them your audience to tout stuff that's very dangerous rhetoric. So I'm sure I just bordered on a little politics today, but I felt it was necessary. So I guess it's just been, I've been thinking about it a lot, and thinking about that free speech is great. But when I was in school, what we learned about free speech was that, even speech that you hate, that is really the speech that you're protected, because who's going to decide if you say something that somebody else doesn't like, and they say, I don't like that. That person should go to jail because that speech is not true, or that speech offends me. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the guy can do whatever he wants and say whatever he wants, and say those things despicable to me about Sir Winston Churchill on his podcast. He has no evidence for it. That's whatever. But when I was in school, what we learned about free speech was, if you say things, if you scream fire in a crowded theater, that was the big example. And I'm sure maybe they still teach that. If you scream fire in a crowded theater and there is no fire, and you cause mass hysteria and people get trampled to death or whatever, trying to get out of a theater for a fire that you created out of your own mind, and and people died or got hurt because you screamed that, that harms other people. That kind of speech isn't protected. So you can say mean things, you can say hateful things, but if you just come out and you just absolutely just bald faced lie and you have no evidence for it, and your lies are dangerous because they tout something like Nazi propaganda, which I felt like that's what Mr. Cooper did or does. That's dangerous, and it doesn't deserve a wide audience. So that's my take. I'm NCR Davis. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.